Hello everyone and welcome to another Wild Edibles episode where today we'll be taking a broad look at some of the most choice wild edibles. These are your perennial species, fruit trees, fruit bushes, that sort of thing. And what's important is that we'll be taking a look at them early in the season when they haven't actually gone to fruit yet. Now this is important for really two reasons, and sort of a compound reason of the two that I'll get into in a second. Now the first reason is that, as I said, these are your choice wild edibles. There are some wild edibles that are quote-unquote edible in that you can eat them, they won't kill you, but they're not something you want to go out of your way for. But these are not that. These are your apples, your pears, your cherries, all that sort of good stuff that you would actually want to go out and forage for. So knowing where these are in advance is a good idea so that you can quickly acquire them when the time comes. The second reason is that being perennials, these plants, being plants, tend not to move around all that much. And, they can stick around for years and years and years. Even, individual plants may die, but populations tend to stick in the same area for years. So the knowledge of what these plants are and where they are is long-term information. The reason I'm even bringing up these two reasons is because these are wild plants, and wild animals really love wild apples and wild cherries. You'll be lucky if you get any. So knowing where these plants are in advance and being prepared to harvest them when the opportunity arises is paramount if you want to eat any of them whatsoever. Another thing I realized while I was editing the video, and that's simply that it's just extra identification. You can be extra sure that what you're eating is what you think you're eating. Inversely, if you identify a plant that you think is a blueberry bush and the berries turn out to be yellow, maybe you got that part wrong, and it's just an extra layer of safety. Also, raspberries and blackberries do fall into this category, but I don't want to have this video run too long, and I've already done videos on each of these separately. So these won't be covered, but if you want any information on these plants, you can always check out my videos or someone else's videos. These plants are quite easy to identify. Now the first plant I'm going to be talking about is blueberry bushes. There are high bush and low bush varieties. This is a high bush variety, and notably a lot of people will say, well, blueberries, there's a danger because they have some toxic lookalikes. That's really only for the fruit. When they're flowering like this, blueberry bushes look nothing like other plants. Now, the red leaves aren't actually characteristic for the plant as a whole. This plant specifically has red leaves. I've seen some with green ones. All depends on the season and where they're growing. But what is characteristic of blueberries are these flowers. The flowers of a blueberry plant can vary in color, but most important is the shape. They essentially look like a bunch of little bells. There are many different varieties of blueberry, so check to see which ones are native in your area. And also, think about planting them. I don't know why more people don't use this in their gardens. These are quite stunning looking. The next plant to look for is something you can really only forage. You've probably never heard of it, and you're certainly not going to find it in any supermarkets. And it's called serviceberry. It goes by a lot of different names. As I said, it's a foraging specialty, and plants like that tend to have a lot of names. A lot of different names, a lot of different species that are apparently exceptionally difficult to tell apart. And they have very showy white flowers, which unfortunately I'm a little late for, so you'll have to look those up. But one of the things that'll give it away is this mottled, smooth bark. This is apparently quite characteristic of this plant. Bark's a little hard to identify. There's so many different things that have similar bark. Maples, hornbeams, all that sort of stuff. But if you see this bark and it's flowering and fruiting, it's almost certainly a serviceberry plant. I will do a more in-depth video when this actually goes to fruit, but this is mostly just so you can figure out what might be a serviceberry plant. Keep your eyes peeled, and you can figure out all the identification later when you go to actually eat it. The next fruit trees of choice are your cherry trees. That right there is an introduced cherry, probably a sweet cherry, and this right here is a native black cherry. They both have similar leaves and bark, with the bark looking very much like a birch. And they both have white flowers. Notably, the sweet cherry is much bigger and it flowers a lot sooner. You can also tell the difference between the two with the lower bark. On a black cherry tree, the lower bark is sort of rough and scaly, whereas on a sweet cherry tree, it's smooth all the way down. Again, they do look quite similar. Sometimes the sweet cherries also have some roughness, but they really don't scale the same way. And the last fruit tree I want to talk about is the apple tree. It's very easy to identify. You don't even need to look at the leaves. The plant has some thorns on it, which can be used to identify it if it's not flowering, but when it is flowering, it's hard to mistake that for anything else. It has sort of red flower buds and white flowers. What is notable about wild apples, though, is that they're rarely ever very good eaten raw. Because of how apple trees work, unless you've grafted it, chances are it's only going to be good for making juice or cooking with in pies. Just biting it raw off the tree, you're going to get a lot of pectin, a lot of fiber that way. Overall, you'd be incredibly surprised at the amount of edible and quite delicious fruit trees and bushes out in the wild. These are only a few of the ones I have noticed in my area. There are plenty more in my state that simply I haven't noticed growing here, and I'm sure if you take a look, you'll certainly find different ones if you live somewhere else. Overall, I just wanted to show you guys a couple that you should probably keep an eye out for, but that's about it. Hope you guys learned something and enjoyed. See ya.